There we go. Hello, everyone. This is Trey Jadlow here. I'm here on this 18th day of May 2020. I'm here with my new friend Seth, whom I haven't interacted with a long time, but came across him on the Presuppositionalism Facebook page and invited him to chat, and he graciously agreed to do it. So welcome, Seth. Thanks for joining me.
Hello. Yeah. I'd actually been interested in doing this previously, but I think, as I'd mentioned before, you ended up leaving one of the groups when we were discussing potentially arranging this last time. So I'm glad that we finally managed to do the tag. And ironically, I think the coronavirus has sort of made people more available than they otherwise would be. So
that's true. Was it Unbelievables because that's where I think I remember.
Yeah. I think we started to have a conversation on Unbelievable, and then you ended up leaving that group. So.
Okay. I find it hard to believe that I've only invited you one time, because I know we've interacted several times.
I mean, we've only interacted on Unbelievable. I think you invited me. I only recall you inviting me one time, and then I said yes, and then you ended up leaving after that, because I think we'd started to schedule it, and then it ended up falling through due to that. But since you were also in the pre-sup group, that sort of allowed this to be scheduled.
Yeah. So would you mind telling me a little bit about yourself? Like what? I mean, you're in the UK, aren't you, or something?
No, I'm in Boston, Massachusetts.
Oh, okay. I don't know why I was thinking you're from the UK.
Because on the Unbelievable site, is centered in the UK, so a sizable percentage of their participants are in the UK.
Yeah,
it's a UK-based show.
Yeah, you don't have much of a British accent.
No, I'm just generic American.
Okay, so regarding religion, your belief in God, stuff like that, give me a little information about that.
Pretty run-of-the-mill atheist, naturalist worldview. I'm a geneticist by training, so work for big pharma and do gene sequencing for them, and I've sort of been doing a lot of these online philosophy and theology groups recreationally for ever since college. So I find the sort of epistemic aspects of that helpful when I'm doing normal scientific investigations. So, and I also find the point of contentions in a lot of these debates to be interesting, although people can obviously get a little lost in the sophistry of it. So, I've seen a couple of your videos, and I find your sort of Thomistic angle intriguing, especially because I'm used to either William Lane Craig evidentialism or Cy Ten Bruggen Kate presuppositionalism, and you and a couple of other Thomists I've seen in the Unbelievable group kind of have this interesting third angle on the discussion. So I've sort of been intrigued.
Which is just the historical view, which is amazingly why it's a minority report. It's really rather.
But why is it minority? Why don't I see as many Thomists around? You'd think that would be the default view.
Yeah, well, Aristotelian thought fell into hard times with the advent of the Enlightenment, and so you've got Descartes coming up with his cogito ergo sum, basically shifting everything from metaphysics to epistemology. And then you had sort of, he was a rationalist, and then you see Hume come along and add, taking it from an empiricist view and saying empirically we can't really know anything. And then you see Kant coming along trying to make a synthesis of the two, because he saw that Hume was going to ruin science and theology with his view. So he tried to take some rationalism and some empiricism and kind of come up with a new synthesis. And so Kant was considered to be a watershed thinker in the history of philosophy. And basically what he did is he confined metaphysics to he called it the noumenal realm, the realm of the noumena, which is like the spirit realm. You can't verify it. He said, if you're going to have any information, you've got to be able to empirically verify it if you're going to have any knowledge. And he didn't even say you could have any knowledge for sure, because again, Descartes basically said the only thing you know for sure is that you exist within your own mind. And Kant kind of accepted that and said, any truth that you're going to say about the outside world is going to be a judgment. In other words, it's something that you're saying to yourself, but you can't say anything outside of yourself. So what Kant said is, he said there are three things that we cannot empirically verify. He said we can't verify our soul, we can't verify the essence of things. Like I can look at this keyboard in front of me, and I can look at it and I can examine it, and I can examine it under a microscope and take it apart, but I can never see the actual essence of the keyboard itself. Or keyboard may not be a good example because it's an
I mean,
artifact.
any object is as good as any other. I
Yeah.
kind of get the gist of it. And what was the third
It's
problem?
and God. And so God must be, because you can't empirically verify him, therefore he cannot be known. So at that point, it's essentially metaphysics was taken off the table for inquiry. And so also you see with the advent of the early modern physics through Isaac Newton, you see a complete shift away from Aristotelian categories, because Aristotle's physics was terrible. It wouldn't work. And so what they did is they took Aristotle and they basically threw him out the window. They also threw out Aristotle's metaphysics, which is his, ingenious view of causality, and many things that he had were just terribly helpful. They were pivotal in medieval Christianity and giving us a quantum leap in thinking, because we got Aristotle's thought. It was revived. We got it from the Jews and from the Muslims. Before the Muslims and in the Jews, the Jewish people rediscovered Aristotle before we did, and we learned Aristotle from the Muslims, and it was a quantum leap for us in our thought. And so when we threw that off, we lost our ability to think about things like I don't know if you're familiar with Aristotle's fourfold causality.
Well, hold on. Historically,
Yeah.
though, what came first? Did the Jews like read and pick up Aristotle in like the first millennium, or did they come up with it independently of him, or like what's the relationship between Aristotle and Judaism?
Maimonides was a medieval scholar, and I think he got it from the Muslims. And the Muslims were Averroes and Avicenna first, and then Averroes discovered Aristotle, and they mastered him. And actually, it was because the Muslims, when they was swept across northern Africa, they went up into Spain, and they threatened the Western culture. And you got Charles Martel, I think it was 725 or 732, I can't remember, came back and knocked them back down. And so they had, I think, 5 centers of learning, or 5 libraries, basically. And actually, I think it was Averroes's library in Cordoba, Spain. We reconquered, it's called Reconquista, for several hundred years. Spain went back and was trying to recapture it, and they recaptured it. And we discovered then the Arabic translations of Aristotle. And that was when basically the quantum leap for us, when we discovered the church. And Thomas Aquinas appropriated Aristotle. He's considered the great synthesizer of Aristotelian.
Okay, so Aristotle writes the works get incorporated by Muslims, and then the works through the Muslims end up back in like the sort of post-Roman Western culture. And where were the Jews during? Did the Jews also see it in that later point, or were they like kind of earlier when they?
They were a little earlier, but I be honest with you, I don't really know the details. I just know it's Maimonides. If you look him up,
okay. Sorry. The only reason I'm asking is I wasn't because I know like Judaism goes back really far, potentially further than like Aristotle, as far as my limited understanding is, and I wasn't sure if like ancient Jewish philosophy sort of landed on similar concepts, or
no,
it sounds like this was just a very Greek idea that was just later adopted into like medieval.
Yes.
Like Judeo-Christian philosophy.
Well,
okay.
Actually, I should say that Plato, for the Jews, yes, I think it was a later adaptation and synthesizing of Aristotelian thought with Judeo philosophy, or the Jewish philosophy. But I would also say that Augustine synthesized Platonic thought. He was a Neoplatonist before he became a Christian, and he's the one who synthesized Plato, and Aquinas synthesized Aristotle with Christianity. The writings of Aristotle, though, were not completely lost, but largely lost throughout the Middle Ages, and then they were rediscovered in the 12th century in that time.
Okay, so I guess my question then is, given like Kant's critiques of metaphysics, which I think largely and concisely capture my opinion on the subject, like what is your criticism of his critiques? Like, I think metaphysics, as Thomas described them Thomas described them, are quite, it's like an elegant story and they're neat categories, but since there's no way to interact with them, they feel like they're just sort of unfalsifiable, like ways to talk about things, but we can also envision all sorts of alternative unfalsifiable ways to talk about things. And so I guess, how do you like save this model from these Enlightenment criticisms, I guess?
Okay, well, I started to talk about how with the advent of early modern physics, so we see a jettisoning. That's a word. They jettisoned the thinking of Aristotle together. So the fourfold causality, they did away with the formal cause and the final cause. And the formal cause would be like the instructions or something that something moves along a certain direction that it's made to do, and the end is what it's for. So, for example, like the eye is made for seeing or something like that. So when you get to naturalistic philosophy, you have no such thing as a formal or final cause or such a thing as purpose. And this is the Achilles heel, I think, one of the Achilles heels of the Darwinist philosophy or naturalism as a whole. From your perspective, Seth, would you say that life is valuable objectively?
No, I don't think objective value is a coherent concept.
Okay. Do you value existence?
Yes, I subjectively value it.
Why? But are you determined to do so?
I am compelled to by my nature. Like
right. And where did your nature come from that gave you that value?
My biology.
Is your biology efficient, or does it have telos, purpose?
I don't know how you could know that, like whether
well,
it did.
Well, you know that there's a principle called ageris sequitur esse, action follows being. Something cannot, or another similar principle is that of the principle of proportionate causality. Something cannot give rise to something else something that it itself does not have.
Can you tell me who coined that term, the principle of proportionate causality?
Aquinas.
Oh, okay, so it was Aquinas's invoked the principle or sort of described it. Now that's something I've also struggled to wrap my head around because it seems intuitively false at like a simple level. Because you would say that does like a single water molecule possess the property of wetness? And yet you put enough together and then they can cause wetness. So I guess I sort of
it doesn't necessarily. Okay, well, that's fair. It doesn't necessarily mean that it has the actual property, but it has the potential for that property. For example, the example I always use is like a cake mix. A cake mix, just the individual ingredients of egg and baking soda and flour do not have the property of sponginess, but the three of those together, they do have the potential for sponginess. And the alternative to that is to say that anything can cause anything. And of course, that's ridiculous. Would you agree with that?
Anything can cause anything. I mean, that would violate our models of reality currently. Okay, so, all right, so you got the proportional. Okay, so go on. So let's continue with your line of reasoning then. So how do you get from proportionate causality to telos has to exist?
Well, would you agree that purpose is something that is native to personhood?
Purpose is native to personhood.
In other words, rocks don't value, ice cream cones.
I think it's more native to the experience of like desire quality. So like if you have some subjective experience that biases you in one way and away from another way, then purpose can arise from that state of affairs.
So purpose can only instantiate for that which has desire, which is personal.
As far as we know, only persons have desire. Perhaps we only define persons in a way that they're only like, if you have desire, you are now a person. So if a rock was shown to have desire, it would have to be because it's a person.
Right. So only persons have
purpose. Persons have desire. Okay.
And so and desire is teleological, right?
Well, with respect to their own thing. So you're saying desire in general. But how are you using the word desire here? Because like you're treating desire like it's this like magic juice that you could like sprinkle on a rock and it wants something, and it's the same kind of desire that like my subjective experience has when I say pain is bad and pleasure is good.
Yeah.
But that brings us back to wetness then. So if you're saying like an embryo wouldn't necessarily we wouldn't necessarily think like an embryo has desire. It's just like a single cell, but you would say it has the potential for desire. And if an embryo has potential for desire, then that means that prior states could contain that potential. So why couldn't you then say that an RNA world described by the RNA world hypothesis 4.5 billion years ago has the potential for desire?
Because, again, desire is something that is teleological. Only persons can have desire or have purpose. You can't have impersonality purposing impersonally.
But that's like saying only liquid can have wetness. You can't have a non-liquid have
No, I'm not speaking about physical properties. I'm talking about purpose, goal. It's a completely different category.
But how is the relation? Okay, so the analogy that I'm understanding is that desire and like the relationship for potential for desire is sort of like the relationship for the potential for wetness, right? Like, so because desire is also kind of a property of an organism. You can demonstrate that an organism clearly prefers one state of affairs over another, and you can say, okay, this now has the property of desire, where say it was unconscious and then it lacks the property, but it has the potential for the property. Fine. Right. Likewise, you could say a liquid, which is a sufficient number of water molecules and at a sufficient temperature, has the property of wetness. But if you have insufficient number of them, then they only have the potential for wetness. So I guess my question is, why couldn't you say that, atoms and molecules under the right conditions have the potential to produce a being who experiences desire, the same way that hydrogen and oxygen have the potential to produce a liquid that has wetness? Like,
you're conflating categories of causal categories again. You're saying certain matters when combined together can bring a certain property, but I'm not talking about the material cause. I'm talking about efficient cause. I'm talking about a goal, a purpose.
So the efficient cause though would be or the purpose in this case would be if some pre-existing desire containing entity, like a person, assembled the pieces together for the purpose of them then having desire. So, and I guess that would be your God or your intelligent designer. But I guess what I don't understand is like how that the principle comes into play there. Because so perhaps maybe I might be question begging. So let's take a step back. On naturalism, what I call desire is indistinguishable from wetness, whereas on theism, desire is a separate category from wetness, where you're saying that, well, wetness is a physical category and desire is this like metaphysical category, or it's its own thing. And so whether desire is the same thing as wetness is itself a point of contention. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that.
Okay.
Are you saying that
so when you're talking about what I call desire, we're not actually talking about the same thing. And so maybe it's the case that what the desire you're pointing to and the desire I'm pointing to are very different. And so when you say, oh, well, like you see a desire, it's like, no, the desire I see is a desire that you don't acknowledge is real.
Okay.
Yeah,
so it's fair. What you're designing, because you're a materialist, so you're saying that it's just a material property, so you deny free will, right?
Well, yet again, that depends on how we define free will. So I deny libertarian free will. I do not deny compatibilist free will. Well,
I'm a compatibilist too.
Okay, great. So then I would say then that and you have a physical process that generates a conscious being that experiences desire. Anything that does not impede that being from pursuing its desire allows for free will, and anything that interferes with that being's ability to pursue its desire would preclude free will. So like if I'm a human who wants to eat ice cream and someone puts a mind control cap on my head and forces me to like not eat ice cream, to like eat a cookie or something else, like they are usurping and overriding my free will. Whereas if they leave me to my own devices, I would experience a materially deterministically caused or even indeterministically caused desire to choose a certain way, and then that desire combined with my experiences and beliefs is the sum total of that is what I call me. And if you allow it to do its thing, it's free to do it. And if you interfere with it, it's not free to do it. Whereas my understanding of the libertarian position is that if you say the desire and the beliefs are not sufficient to call it a person, there's also a third thing in there called personhood, which is separate in addition to desire and beliefs. And that's the decision maker. But my problem with that is that if you remove desire and beliefs, there's no longer a basis to make any decision. So for my purposes, when I say we have free will, I say we are beings that are causally, either deterministically or indeterministically compelled by our own desires to choose a certain way. And so long as nothing prevents us from pursuing our desires, we have free will. So I don't know if what usage you're using there, but that's just my definition.
So from your perspective, though, that free will does not involve goal.
No, it has to involve a goal. Because if there's no goal, then it's just an arbitrary decision.
Okay, but how do you have goals instantiating unintentionally?
How do you have goals instantiating unintentionally? Well, you would have a state of affairs that would result.
Unintentional.
Yeah, well, it's like asking how do you have wetness instantiate without wetness? I would say that it's that you would create something that would have its own limited intention, but it wouldn't have a larger intention.
Okay, where did that intentionate? How can the intention instantiate unintentionally?
Well, it depends on what language you're using to describe like how we came about and what we want, because how we come about and what we want are two separate things. Like you're assuming how we came about is dependent on there being a want involved, that something wanted us to come about. So if we were like, androids created by an inventor, the inventor wanted us to come about and it wanted us to want certain things. And so it then created us and then gave us desires and then we come out with that. And so the alternative would be, okay, we came about for reasons independent of some inventor, and that those reasons happen to be the case that we resulted in having desires, and that any meaningful statement you can make about, purpose is only limited to our desires because it comes from, this non-intentional setting. And so you're arguing that violates the principle of proportionate causality, but I don't see how that's a problem on naturalism, because on naturalism, you could just say that we all, like, matter contains the potential to create something with desire, just like it has the potential to create something that's wet, even if it's not currently wet or even if it doesn't currently have desire.
You're confusing categories again. You're just saying everything is material, and you're saying that the efficient cause arose out of the matter unintentionally.
I mean,
this is where
we get. I mean, this is where it's a problem with our language, right? So typically, naturalists will talk about evolution using a teleonomic term. So it's just we're using the language of intention just because as a tool to communicate, but we're not using it. Correct. Yeah, it's all nominally teleological.
Are you really intending to have a conversation with me, or is it just an illusion?
Well, I mean, that depends on how you define your terms, of course. So with evolution, you have a state of affairs that results in these discrete organisms that then are selected for based on the presence or absence of advantageous desires. And so prior to that, you would have biomolecules or prebiotic chemistry, and then eventually you get discrete Darwinistic cycles, and then that would lead into selection pressures on preferences for states of affairs that are more conducive to your line continuing to exist. And so in that case, you have a model of an unintentional state of affairs leading to a being that has an intention that's limited to its own purposes. But to say that there's a larger intention says that, like, this whole system of organisms reproducing and eating and just kind of predating on each other serves some greater purpose. But like when we look at, like, say, we can look at like a bat wing or a bird wing or a beak, and it's blindingly obvious that there's like a quote unquote purpose for, like, oh, the bat wing's purpose is to propel it through the air, or the beak's purpose is to crack a nut open. But then when you zoom out one step and ask what's the purpose of the whole biosphere or the whole purpose of the organism, it suddenly, like, I don't know, you could just make up any story you want. Oh, it's to
That's
show
right.
off the grandeur and beauty of God or something. It's like, okay, well, I mean, that's one story, but it's nowhere near as obvious as the purpose of the wing itself. And so what ends up happening is you can only, your language is only meaningful within that limited context. And the moment you take a step out, it starts to break down.
Yeah, that's why I think Darwinian evolution is an amazing 18th century or 19th century concoction, but we're living in the 21st century. We need to come out of the dark ages and begin to think again. And we need to return back to pre-enlightenment thought where we can think about purpose, because you can't. You're just giving me a just so story. You're just saying, well, that's just the way it is. You're not giving me justification. You're just saying, well, matter can value things because that's the way it is. And that's the only question, that's the only answer I've ever gotten to that question that it boils down to. And it's silly. It's not justified. It's just special pleading.
Wait, so it's just the way it is. I mean, I gave you a story about how you can get some material. Well, what do you mean by just so story? Like, as opposed to what?
You just say that's just the way it is. Matter just decides to eventually just to.
No, matter doesn't decide to. That's imposing the agency that's already.
That's exactly right. You're saying it's unintentionality, intended intention.
Well, no, I'm saying that our concept of intention breaks down if you try to like zoom out beyond.
Because it doesn't fit your model, so you have to somehow deny it and yet affirm it at the same time.
Well,
so you
come up with fit the model. It's literally like the definition within the naturalistic worldview.
That's right, and it's silly.
Well, but so that the statement that it's silly is yet again question begging, because it's only silly on the theistic worldview where you are assuming that like there is this like context.
There's value. There's such a thing as value. We're valuing.
Yeah, great, and that's fine. If there's a God who values things, then great. There's value. It's objective. That's fine. But if we're not willing to like do an internal critique of another view, that's not a valid criticism.
That's what I'm doing.
No, you're doing an external critique because you're literally applying a theistic standard to an atheistic worldview. So that so it's like that's like me saying that your problem is that you have a God that doesn't exist in your worldview. It's like, okay, that's that doesn't. The principles that you're applying of like proportionate causality and the metaphysics you're applying only work if you start with the assumption of theism.
You start with the assumption of value or goal.
Yeah, and the assumption of value and goal, it does not have a universal application on naturalism. So yet again,
it doesn't fit, so I have to deny it. But it's there. You have to admit it. You even say it, you admit it, and you say teleonomy, but you say it's really an illusion. You are utterly inconsistent. I am giving an internal critique, and you have utterly, your house of cards has fallen.
No, it's a limited scope. Like you're trying.
Oh, so it does exist.
Remember, I was saying that how are we using the term? I'm using the term kind of like wetness, whereas it has a limited scope. Like that's like you saying like, can there be like universal wetness absent water molecules? Like, oh, well, how could something non-wet produce something wet? It would have to be wet to begin with. And you'd say the principle of course of causality would argue that wetness is impossible or wetness is an illusion.
No, that's not what the principle says at all. Not at all.
So then how do you rescue wetness without applying the same criticism that you're applying to desire?
Because the hydrogen and the oxygen must have the potential for wetness when
great. And so why can't I say that matter has a potential for desire?
Because matter is not material. You're talking about material properties. I'm talking about efficient properties. I'm talking about teleological properties. Those are purpose. They only come from mind. They only come from.
Yes, but on naturalism, those properties are not real. So
that's right.
Okay.
So this is an illusion. We're not really having a conversation. It's just an illusion. We're not trying to speak to each other. We're just a bunch of, like the presuppositions.
Well, it might be an illusion with respect to the particular definition of desire you are using. Perhaps you can clarify, like when you say desire and I say desire, we might not be talking about the same thing. So
all I want to focus on, my friend, is the goal, that we have a goal there.
Okay, but there's all this baggage behind what it means to have a goal or what the implications of a goal are that could be different on our views that would make it appear that there's an inconsistency when in reality we're using the same letters and sounds to describe very different things.
I don't think so.
Okay, so can you define what you mean by desire and goal specifically?
That which moves toward a certain end.
Okay.
Teleologically,
so it moves towards a certain end.
Mm-hmm. And it's always going to be the sanctity of existence. Even Darwin.
Okay. Hold on. Would you say then that a falling rock has a goal?
No.
it's moving towards a certain end.
No, toward a goal that is more than just a placement in space, but toward, again, a goal of existence. Even Darwinian synthesis is that.
Toward a goal of existence.
And it's not going to be inanimate objects. It's got to be that which has the capacity, I think, or so I will say, the capacity of both being.
Does light rays hitting the ocean's surface have the goal of creating a cloud?
No, those are material actions. I'm talking about, do you have the goal of preserving the Earth?
Right. So I'm saying though that's why your definition of create a certain state of affairs is not actually what you're talking about. Like, so
I'm talking about intentionality.
Okay, great. So intentionality. What is intentionality?
That you are moving in a direction toward a particular goal, which is always going to be for.
So it sounds like you're using an experiential definition. Like there's because it's not, you can't just say anything moving towards some state of affairs obviously doesn't work, because that, you would say, creating a cloud obviously is not intentional. Okay, so that definition doesn't work. So let's say that there needs to be some subjective element, like, obviously, like an unconscious person doesn't have the goal of exhaling carbon dioxide or something. So we would say, even though they do it, so clearly there has to be this subjective experience component, right? So, yes. Okay, great. So then when you say goal, you mean that a being who has a subjective experience is trying to pursue one state of affairs over others. So it's some qualitative transition. Great. But then
that will extend existence.
Well, that's potentially a goal, but you can also have suicidal goals. Like,
but
you may have the goal.
Broken. That is intentionality. That is intentionality gone awry.
Okay. I mean, you're just judging one goal with respect to another goal.
Well, you are. That's what you say.
Well, no, you literally just said that's intentionality gone awry.
Do you believe in psychopaths?
Huh?
Do you believe in psychopaths?
Yes, there are people. Okay, so I'm not disagreeing that there are mental states that people could hold that are clearly not conducive to health and well-being, as most people.
And that's a bad thing, right?
Yeah, we healthy, happy people would look at that, and we'd all agree that we all don't desire that. Fine. Right. But that's us. That's us measuring that person's desire against our desire, and us saying, well, their desire is not matching our desire. Their desire must be broken. Or it could be you matching their desire against God's desire and saying that their desire is not God's desire. It must be broken. Either way, we're just comparing one desire to another desire, but that doesn't make it any less of a desire.
What about hatchet murderers?
Okay, yet again, their desire to kill someone with a hatchet is being compared to our desire to being well-being, or God's desire to thou shalt not kill.
And what do you do with hatchet murderers?
Well, we typically try to prevent them from violating our desires.
Yeah. So everybody moves toward the sanctity of existence. It's an unspoken, unquestionable moral value.
But I guess I'm not clear though. Okay, so you're creating these two categories. There's correct desires and incorrect desires. Okay, what is a correct making property of a desire?
I don't know what that means.
So, like you said, that being a suicidal or being an axe murderer or psychopath is a person possessing of incorrect desires, and somebody who holds existence to be sanctified holds effectively a correct desire. Because you were just making appeals to these are examples of incorrect desires. What is the correct making property? What's the difference between the correct desire and the incorrect desire?
I'm sorry, I'm still not understanding the question.
So a person who's suicidal, a person wants to kill themselves. Mm-hmm. Is that a correct desire to have? Is that a good desire?
No.
No, that's a bad desire. A person who wants to have a child, is that a good desire or a bad desire?
That's a good desire.
Good desire. Okay, great. So we've now have qualitative difference between two different desires. So it's not the mere having of a desire, it's having of the right kind of desire, right? So what's the difference between a good desire and a bad desire?
One promotes the sanctity of existence, the other does not.
Okay. So the sanctity of existence is the difference between a good desire and a bad desire. So how do you demonstrate the sanctity of existence then?
By looking at your life.
By looking at your life. Okay.
No, your life. Seth's life.
By looking at my personal life, that I currently experience a self-preservation instinct. So personally, that makes me feel like my existence.
Causalitatis argument.
Huh?
It's a via causalitatis argument. We look at creation and we make these arguments by what we see.
Okay, so we start with like my personal self-preservation instinct. I have that, but I also have a desire to avoid intolerable suffering. So how do I know that
I really like your analytical interaction, by the way. It's very enjoyable.
I like I said, I'm interested in figuring out what the point of contention is, and I find 9 times out of 10 we're not using the same words the exact same way.
Okay.
And I think like people kind of freak out and they start yelling at each other. Oh, you're an idiot. You're not using the same definition as me. It's like, no, hold on. Let's, Wittgenstein was complaining about this for a lot. So let's see if we can like look in each other's boxes as best we can.
Sure.
This is interesting. So I currently have 2 desires. I have a self-preservation desire and I have a desire to avoid intolerable pain.
Mm-hmm.
Why is the self-preservation desire always more important than the avoid intolerable pain desire?
Self-preservation is always more important than the one
than avoidance of intolerable pain.
I'm not sure. Can you give me an example?
Well, so person who wants to preserve themselves, so someone who acts to save their own life, is acting in accordance with self-preservation desire. A person who acts to end their own life, presumably due to intolerable pain, is acting on the end intolerable pain desire. For example, Robin Williams, he was in a horrific amount of intolerable pain and he acted to end his own life. Clearly, like that changed the calculus for his subjective experience. So then given that those 2 desires, how do we conclude that one of them is the quote unquote correct desire?
Oh, by what you would have done if you were with Robin Williams right before he tried to kill himself.
So can you elaborate on that?
What would you have done if you were with Robin Williams and he was trying to kill himself?
I mean, my instinct would have been to try to help him, obviously. But that's also me imposing my desire on him. Now, the other question, though, is if
desire on every person that you rebuke, you judge, you are imposing your desire upon them. You judge people all the time.
I'm not saying that itself is a bad thing. I'm just saying it's just descriptive.
Okay.
But nevertheless, that's just
me imposing to something beyond yourself, because you don't kill people for not eating vanilla ice cream when you like.
No. I appeal to common experiences. So if you and I are there with Robin Williams, I can appeal to your self-preservation instinct or maybe your empathy or sympathy and say, like, we got to help him. First of all, we will try to impose our desire to perpetuate his existence on him by trying to save his life. And then looking for
talk him out, say, no, don't do this. Don't do this. It's not necessary.
Whatever method we use,
right.
we would try to prevent him from killing himself because we are imposing our desire on him.
Because we know that there's a desire outside of ourself that is greater, which is existence.
Well, but that's the step there that I can't get to, because all we have right now for certain is that we're outvoting him. Like, we want one thing, he wants a different thing, we're outvoting him. Great. Now, how do we get to that third step where there's something outside of all 3 of us that says you 2 are correct and you are incorrect?
Well, that's a question you need to ask yourself, because that's how you live your life. You don't want people to go to jail for eating vanilla ice cream, do you?
No, but I can come up with reasons why I don't want that. And then I can show those reasons to other people.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So, sorry, I could say I can come up with reasons why I don't want that, and then I can show those reasons to other people, and I can get them all on my team, and then we can all agree. And then our agreement becomes the quote unquote external enforcement.
No, the agreement is not. It's the sanctity of existence, because if you all agreed to kill somebody, say Hitler and the Jews, would it then become good because of your conventionalism, because you guys can convene together to do that? No. It's because it's not because the majority wants to do it. It's because you are doing the right thing toward the sanctity of existence. Whether
Okay, how do you get to that? How do you get to that? Because like
well, we
we
know that
start,
we are programmed towards such. Would you agree with that?
yes.
Okay, now from my perspective, God is subsistence existence itself. Therefore, he is the center, should be the center of my worship because he himself is subsistence existence. Since I've been determined to value existence, I should value him above all others. I made a big jump there, but I always like to try to throw that in there because that's really what we're here for.
Yeah, no, that's great. But that, I mean, what you're effectively saying is you're more or less giving Craig's moral argument in so many words. You know, like
I don't study Craig. I'm not a big fan.
I know you're not a fan, but you're more or less saying his argument. You know, like what is it? If God exists, subjective moral values and duties exist. Subjective moral values and duties exist. Therefore, God exists.
Actually, it's more of an ontological argument because I have to go back to him, my deriving my being from him because I'm an effect. It must come from a cause, not say that I am God, but he created me ex nihilo. There must be something that I rely on because I'm dependent on my existence, and because and then I know that I exist, I value existence, and then since I value existence, it must point back to him who gave me my existence and who I should be worshiping because existence matters. That's how I've been determined.
Okay, I mean that works really great on within the theistic view. The jump, the leap that I'm like the sort of the edge of the water that I'm not able to like traverse to get there is how do we traverse from consensus to some external truth making like point of reference that says you two are correct and Robin Williams is not correct. That's the part I can't. And then you were making statements like, oh well, like what if like Hitler was right? Well, the problem with what if Hitler was right is like that's more or less we're still in the same boat as we were with Robin Williams, right? Like you and I would look at Hitler and we both personally and subjectively dislike it, and we can assert that he's wrong, you know, because we can envision some state of affairs where everyone around us disagrees with us about what is right. Yeah, what if you and I are the only ones left on the planet who think that like, you know, Hitler was wrong and everyone else thinks he's right? We're like, well, we're outvoted, but that doesn't change my personal opinion. But I still can't get there from there to like we are in fact correct by some external standard and everyone else is incorrect. And that's also, by the way, a double-edged sword because, okay, what if we're all incorrect about Hitler? What if it turns out Hitler was doing the right thing and we're just uninformed about it? Like, does that change our opinion on the matter? Like, I mean, maybe not. Like, that can be a really difficult hypothetical for people to engage with, honestly. You know, I sometimes try to do thought experiments about, you know, a divine command that people would find would violate their moral intuition. And most people just flat out refuse to even entertain the thought experiment. But it's like, look, if we're going to say that objective morality or objective teleology exists independently of our desires, then that means there's no contradiction entailed in something that we intensely do not desire being morally good.
I agree.
And it could also be the case that we are all mistaken. Like it turns out, yeah, like if you can envision a world where Hitler wins and everyone agrees the Holocaust is bad, but it was really bad, and they're all mistaken. Then the flip side is also true. It could be Hitler lost. We all agree the Holocaust is bad, but we're all mistaken about that. And we're like, well, okay. Like, if that's the case, that just means my moral intuition is wildly unreliable. And that means that there could exist some very strange and alien, like telos floating in the ether out there, compelling us to do things we do not want to do. And it's like, it just seems like nobody wants to entertain that like logical space. Like, and it just, to me, it feels like people are just taking their subjective desires and just projecting it onto the universe because they just feel it in their heart of hearts that this is wrong. And I'm like, great, that works as like a hyperbolic expression of emotional impact. But that's not enough to get me to the point where like, this is in fact an investigatable state of affairs that we can point to and say, yes, this is wrong. Like I just cannot get past the whole, how do we know we're just not outvoting Hitler?
But would you agree that we are all driven by this goal of the sanctity of existence?
I wouldn't, because there are people who are suicidal. Like, and then
would you agree that they're broken?
Well, but that's the thing is they're broken with respect to my personal view. I cannot say they're broken with respect to some larger view.
But you impose your personal view upon them, yet you don't tell them they have to eat vanilla ice cream.
Correct. And that's because I have personal view reasons to do that. Like
Right.
I'm not imposing my personal view. At no point in my pluralistic participation am I appealing to something outside of consensus. If you could pick any prescriptive statement one could make, and I can navigate our pluralistic democracy by simply making appeals to other people's shared subjective experience. I can make appeals to sympathy, I make appeals to empathy, I can make appeals to consequence, and I can reveal to them that they in fact desire the same thing I desire. At no point do I need to just inform them that they are incorrect by some external standard. And it's because of that, like I wouldn't even know how to get to an external standard.
Yes, but you need to justify your internal standard. That's my whole point.
To whom and why? Like for what end? Like I only need to justify it as far as my interlocutor.
Why do you value existence when it doesn't matter? This is a question.
I can't help but value it. Like
it's a just so story. That's right.
It doesn't matter. Like there's no other like.
But it's a lie. Your life does not matter. Why do you act like it does?
Why? Well, I mean, because it doesn't matter. Like it doesn't matter that it's a lie. Like.
I mean, it's so pathetically weak, my friend.
But that's just you making your own evaluation of it and asserting that evaluation as broken or with respect to the objective standard that you're pointing to.
You agree with that? You agree the suicidal person is broken?
No, I say that he's broken with respect to my.
Hold on just a minute.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I got to. Sorry.
So I agree that he's broken with respect to my like ice cream flavor, but I do not.
Does it matter?
Huh?
Does it matter that he's broken regarding your ice cream?
It matters to me, and it matters to everyone I talk to.
Do you think he should be killed because of it?
Do I think he should be killed because of it? No.
Unless
it can be demonstrated that his suffering really is intolerable and inescapable, then I think.
No, I'm saying that he should be punished for it, for not liking.
Punished for it. Well, no, I don't. To be clear, I'm not a believer in retribution. I think punishment is purely.
Jail, don't you?
Huh?
You believe in jail?
Well, I mean, I think our prisons are largely retributive and have serious issues with them. I believe that there's only 3 justifications for any sort of intervention. One is deterrence, although that has questionable efficacy. The second is sequestration, so you simply remove them from the ability to cause further harm. And the third is hopefully restoration rehabilitation, where you can correct whatever it was that caused them to misbehave in the first place.
But you believe in taking away their right to live as they want.
What?
You believe in taking away their right to live as they want.
Yes, I believe there are circumstances when it can be warranted to impose our collective desires on their individual desires.
Forcibly.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and what it seems like here is you make it sound like I'm trying to persuade some outside interlocutor, like as if like, okay, there's me and you and Robin Williams there, and then we're going to step outside of that context and we're going to have some meta discussion with God or some aliens or angels or something show up, and they're like, wait a minute, why are you doing that? Like, why does your value matter over someone else's, right? But like, because that third interlocutor who was removed from this whole process cannot have this conversation with me, there is no like there's no other like discussion. There's literally only 2 people on the planet I can talk to about it: people who agree with me and people who don't agree with me, and that's it. And I can't, and it could be the case that like everyone who agrees with me and myself, we're all mistaken according to some external standard. But unless I have access to that standard, I don't have anything else to work with. So it's literally just me.
Your standard is, you do have a standard. It's a sanctity of existence. You have access to that.
Yes, I have a personal sanctity of existence, but I cannot prove that the sanctity of existence is the correct answer.
Then why do you impose it upon others?
Because I want to.
Okay, so it's just your power. But if you don't believe in a sanctity of existence, should you have freedom to impose that upon others?
I mean, what does it matter at that point? Like, to what are you making the moral appeal when you're telling me that I don't have any right to try to apply power to anyone at any time for any reason?
I think that you do when you promote the sanctity of existence, but you don't believe in conventionalism. You're saying you do, but you really don't. Conventionalism states that the herd mentality rules. It's red in tooth and claw. Might makes right, no matter what.
No. Okay, so I'm not suggesting that like if everybody were to like suddenly vote for things that I personally disagree with, that I would then agree with them. I would just be in the unfortunate circumstance.
Would they be right?
Huh?
Would they be right?
It would depend.
Right is
it would depend. Like, so the best I could do is, in that case, I could try to make two appeals to deeper desires they hold and explain to them that they're mistaken. So somebody like Hitler, there is a way to appeal to his deeper desires to point out that
wrong.
He's objectively wrong with respect to his deeper desires.
How do you know what his desires are?
Because he's a human and he has the same needs as all humans.
Oh, so you're just like everybody else.
Well, all humans have fundamental desires that are pretty hard to get away from.
Existence, right?
Huh?
And they value existence.
Very frequently, yes. One of our fundamental desires is. Sorry?
And when they don't, they're broken. That's what you're implying with Hitler.
I'm saying they're broken with respect to our fundamental desires. Yes.
So there's a teleological purpose toward humans to value existence, and when they don't, they're broken. We need to help them to realize that they're broken.
Only with respect to our fundamental desires. It depends on the point of reference. You're saying they're broken with respect to a larger external point of reference. I'm saying they're broken with respect to a collective point of reference that we call well-being. So we'd say it's not conducive to well-being.
Or is that what we are?
No, well-being has a set of facts that are determined by the types of beings we are. Obviously, as Dillahunty puts it, drinking battery acid is never conducive to improving your well-being. So we can make objective facts about well-being, but if you had a plurality of people who fundamentally did not value well-being, there's not really any argument you could make to them. What would you go up to them and say? Well, the creator of the universe disagrees with you, then you should really stop hurting yourself. And they're like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that. I guess I will stop hurting myself.
But that makes sense. But you're the exact opposite.
Well, I don't see that as any more compelling than me informing them that, hey, if you do this, you will damage your health. And they're saying yeah, I know, that's what I'm trying to do. Why?
It doesn't matter. On your view, it doesn't matter. Life does not matter. Why would you go out of your way to even feed yourself if it really doesn't matter?
Well, because I don't care if it matters outside of me, and if it did matter outside of me, it would. Huh?
You're just giving me a just so story. You're saying life matters because it matters to me. But
I'm not saying life matters. I'm saying there are things that matter to me. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that things that matter outside of me or people I talk to. Like, I don't see how things can matter outside of human conversation. Like, what you seem to be saying is that, and don't get me wrong, I appreciate the point of view, right? I appreciate from the theist point of view, you're sitting in this kind of comfy position where, like, you kind of have these confident answers to questions that cause people emotional discomfort. Like, what's the meaning of life, the universe, and everything? Why does anything exist? Like, these are scary existential questions. And that, like, if you're sitting in the setting where, like, oh, the creator of the entire universe is somebody that's relatable, that you can have a personal relationship with, who loves you and has a purpose for you and all that. Yeah, I get it. I understand that that's like, there's an emotional comfort there that if you were to suddenly take all that away and jump to this sort of relativistic naturalism, it would just feel very stark, empty, and nihilistic.
Irrational, yeah.
But where I'm coming from is taking kind of a very rigorous epistemic standard in saying
you're anything but rigorous here in this conversation, my friend. Anything but rigorous.
Okay, so then please explain to me then how you can get to that third external standard. That's, like I said, that's the part where I can't
You're the one
get to that
preaching
point.
It to me, my friend. You're the one that says that well-being is a universal human a goal. And you need to tell me how that instantiates unintentionally with a life that doesn't matter.
Well, it instantiates unintentionally due to selective pressures on the types of beings we are.
And
That
it
any
doesn't. And it's a
being that
lie.
does
It doesn't
not,
matter.
huh?
It's a lie. It doesn't matter.
It's a lie. It doesn't matter. Well, I mean, it doesn't matter beyond that. But why is that? Why should that inform our decision making
Because
or
we got to live
priorities?
lives that correspond to reality.
But there's nothing to which to correspond to. There's literally just what you want and what you don't want. And even in your view, there's still this pre-existing desire to align yourself to the telos of reality, which I don't necessarily share. And even if I were made aware of a telos, I'm not convinced that that telos would necessarily be in everyone's best interests. What if it's a horrific telos? Like if you discovered tomorrow that the purpose of your existence was to experience the maximum amount of pain possible, and inflict it on other people with the maximum amount of pain possible, would you be like, oh, I guess that's what I got to do, and then go out and do it? Like, or would you be disturbed by
Why
that
is that
telos and
offensive
avoid
to you?
it?
That's the whole point.
Huh?
Why is that offensive to you? Why do thinking such a thought like that is so abhorrent to you?
No, I'm curious. I'm not making a judgment. I'm genuinely curious. So, like, if tomorrow you discovered that the telos was pain, would you then be like, all right, we should do pain? You would pursue pain, right? Like,
I would pursue God because he is the very substance of my essence, and I would look to him for everything that I did. And that's not an emotional thing. That's a rational, necessary corollary to having existence be valuable in my own life.
that's but specifically pain though. Like, if God said, like, okay, like I've called you all to experience Jesus' pain on the cross. The more pain you have, the closer you are to him. Go for it. Like, would you then start just inflicting and experiencing as much pain as you
And
could?
and if he promised, I would be with you in it, because Christians do that. I just watched a movie the other day, Tortured for Christ, for Richard Wurmbrand. He was tortured for his faith. Yes, and he was quite satisfied with the life that he lived in.
Would you torture someone else for your faith?
What do you mean?
Well, so there was another movie. I forget what it's called. It was like took place in Japan. I'm trying to remember the actors. I'll have to look it up. I'll get back to you on that. But basically, it was about these missionaries. Huh?
Was it the World War II movie?
I think it was like World War II. There's missionaries in Japan, and basically, long story short, like the Japanese are trying to, like, persecute the missionaries, and they knew the missionaries were like, please torture me, this is what I want. So instead what they did is they would force the missionaries to sit and watch their followers be tortured, and they would say, renounce, or else we're going to torture your followers. And so it's not just we're torturing you, we're torturing like someone you love and care about in front of you. And then that created kind of, that basically broke one of the characters. I think Andrew Garfield was in it. And so, like, there's a sort of, whatever. I mean, and then taking a step further, it would be, would you then go and inflict torture on people for that end? Like, and I'm not trying to make a value judgment. If like someone says, yes, I would do it, fine. That just kind of clarifies the point. But I also understand that it's kind of a fraught topic, and stupid atheists will be like, see, look, he wants to torture babies or something because God told him to, or something. It's like, that's not the point. The point is just figuring out, like, what is your personal priority? It's your personal priority. Like, I will do whatever is quote unquote the correct thing to do, regardless of what it is. Or is there some level of like line that you just couldn't cross? Maybe you'll say, like, all right, I personally couldn't bring myself to do that. I would chastise myself for being unable to do that. I think I ought to do it, but I just wouldn't be able to do it. Or would you say, like, oh, there is a line that would be too far, and I would just say, no, that is not acceptable.
A great example might be Abraham, and I think it's Genesis 17, sacrificing his son, Isaac. Would that be a good example?
Well, no, because I thought the whole point of that example was Abraham had faith that God wouldn't actually ask for it.
Could you say it again?
My understanding, I could be wrong, was that the only reason why Abraham went through, like, he went through the motions, but he knew he like had faith that God wasn't going to actually ask him to go through with it.
No, he didn't. He believed that God could raise him from the dead after he killed him.
Same difference. Like, so that he would think that, like, he wasn't actually.
So he was actually thinking he was going to have to kill his son.
Great, but then he would still have faith that God would hold some end of the bargain, not like, kill your son and I'm doing nothing in response.
Right.
Yeah. So that's a little bit different from, like, just trying to come up with the most extreme examples of, like, okay, now.
Well, then no, I wouldn't.
Okay, so your compliance is contingent on God holding up his end of the bargain to some degree that's consistent with your pre-existing desires. Like, in which case, like, you do have some desires that are more fundamental than mere compliance.
I don't really understand that.
So, I mean, if at absolute rock bottom, the top priority is do whatever God says, no matter how many other desires you have to violate to do it, then that's your top priority.
Mm-hmm.
If, however, there are some desires you either could not or would not violate, then those desires are in fact your top priority.
Right.
And if those desires are independent of God, then it doesn't matter if there's a God. You hold those desires either way. You're compelled by them. They're overwhelming, and
right.
and it doesn't change whether there's a God that's below them ordering you to do it or not do it or do anything.
Yeah, but you've descended into irrationality though, because you've got all of these intentions that you're valuing.
Okay.
For no
Desire
reason.
is fundamentally irrational. That's really what it comes down to. Rationality is just a framework to feed things through to get an input and an output. Like, desire cannot be rational. Like, and that was demonstrated by, I'm sure you probably heard the NPR story about the guy who like sustained a traumatic brain injury and he lost the ability. I think he had like brain cancer or something. But anyway, he lost the ability to experience emotion. Mm-hmm. And as a result, he could only be rational with zero emotion, and he was just incapable of functioning. He would just sit there at like the cereal aisle all day, just listing objective properties of cereals and this hopeless effort to try to choose one, but without any emotion, without any like qualia or qualitative standard to measure anything against. They're just arbitrary properties. Every single property is perfectly equal to every other one. And then things would happen to him in his life. Like his wife would divorce him and he would just talk about it like it was the weather, because just he had no concept of it. So of course desire is irrational. Like there's no way to get around that. Like, because otherwise you're just saying, like, I could say,
no, it's not irrational. You don't because desire is irrational. Then you would say when somebody kills somebody, you would say that was an irrational desire.
Sorry. I would say irrational then. Irrational would be you are jumping to the incorrect conclusion and you are arriving at an outcome that's in direct contradiction to the very thing you claim to want.
But it's not irrational because you are deliberating between the sanctity of existence to determine your desire. Our desires, we always say that desire is broken if it leads not toward the sanctity of existence. Listen, I need to get going here. I got to get back to work.
Yeah.
But thank you for entertaining me. You're a wonderful interlocutor, and I appreciate your rigorous style and analytical acumen as you engage these things, because most of the time I don't get that. And I like it when
people get fixated on the definitions. That's why so many arguments like fall into semantics and name calling. But I do think it's an interesting.
And you're very. Hold on just a minute. You're very charitable too, and I very much appreciate that. I love having conversations where you're not obfuscating, you're not trying to talk over me. Sometimes people get nervous and you start talking over you, and you're like interacting in a very honest fashion. So it's very enjoyable. Thank you very much.
All right, well, I'll be happy to do it again in a future time. So
okay, yeah, we can do that. So we'll do something again. Okay.
All right. Thank you very much.
Have a great day. We'll see you.